actor in Tales from Avonlea. And anyway, she's Canadian and she does a lot. Anyway, she did this film called My Life Without Me. And she plays a working class woman with 2 young daughters and a sweet but very unreliable husband. And she lives with her family in a little trailer, and she cleans the local university now. She doesn't take classes there, she cleans there. And one day she collapses. So she goes in for a checkup and finds out that she has cancer. It's spreading rapidly. She decides not to tell anyone. Instead, she makes a list of all the things to do before her death, that bucket list somebody mentioned, and that range from getting a new hairstyle to making love to somebody other than her husband. But she also made tape recordings for everyone, and particularly for her children on their birthdays. So the idea was that they would pull out that recording, on the 10th birthday. Here's when you can get your ears pierced. Here's when you can do this. And she left these tapes with her oncologist because her husband was so unreliable. She couldn't trust him to hold on to them. But she also knew that he would fall apart when she died. So that's an ethical will. They had a little trailer. They had no money to speak of. And yet this was a way that she could be present in her children's life. The New York Times had a lovely article a while back called Farewell with Love and Instructions. And it talked about the way that parents can leave letters or gifts, videotapes their children. So in this article, this essay, Melanie Sovereign, who's a 15-year-old, reaches for the videotape, slides it into the VCR, and settles, quote, back into her mother's words, the richness of her voice, the solace of her smile, close quote. Her mother, Gail, was then 39 years old, and when she did this video, she says, try not to wear heels. Dyeing your hair is okay. A little pink or purple is good. And ear piercing is okay at 11 or 12. Laughing and dancing with Melanie, who was then 5 years old, and her sister Lindsay, who was 3. The girl's father has since remarried and has another child. And Lindsay, who was then 3, says, if it weren't for the videos and the pictures, we probably wouldn't know much about her. And Melanie says, because memories can be there and not be there. This is a permanent memory that will never erase. It doesn't have to be the most profound life lesson. It's the day-to-day things. So again, especially, when you're leaving, if we're lucky, we live long lives. We die in our sleep. My grandmother used to pray to die in her sleep. That would be a good death. We pray for a good death. But sometimes we don't know. And so putting something like that together means that our children who are going to feel the loss of us will have something. So, different methods. How do I write an ethical will? Well, you can start off, and some of the things I have in your folder sort of take you through that. Some common themes are from the past: meaningful personal or family stories, lessons learned from experience, regrets. Other common themes might be from the present. What are my personal values and beliefs? What about the faith community that I belong to? Or it might not be a faith community. It may be a bowling league. It may be a quilting circle. Whatever it is that you belong to that's important to you in the present, you might want to write about that. Expressions of love and gratitude. Then there's some common themes for the future. Blessings, dreams, and hope. Hopes for the present and future generations. You might want to give some advice, some guidance. And you might, as I mentioned before, have specific funeral and memorial plans. In the Death Cafe, for example, I don't know if you were there, but Amy Cunningham has worked with the Death Cafe, and she's somebody who does green burials, and she is a funeral director, and she came to it. She surprised herself that she came to this. But what she does is help people really think about how they want to do it. You don't have to do things the way they've been done, going to a regular funeral home. So it might be that you connect with someone like Amy who does green burials and think about alternative ways of doing that.
What's green burial?
It's not using any kind of preservatives, and it's also not using any kind of, it's also not cremation, which is also not environmentally terrific. But it's just,
with the body then?
you bury them, but without all the chemicals.
Do you bury them in a box?
Sometimes they do
Or
it
in the earth?
No, I'm not. I'll give you the information. There's a lot of information. Yes and yes. You can do it in a box, you can do it in a shroud, I mean, there's lots of ways. You do have to check legally to see where that's allowed. There are legal ramifications for this. But people are thinking of different ways of doing it because they want to make sure that if they've been concerned about the environment while they're alive, they want to make sure that when they die, that they're equally.
Cool.
Yeah, so in other words, you don't have to do things in a particular rote fashion. You can be thinking about different ways of doing it and putting that in writing. There are different approaches. You can start with an outline, an open thoughts. You can do have exercise, writing exercises.
And you know one way of doing it?
I'm sorry?
I had an English teacher in college, and she had a thing, which I was very helpful. I just used it the other day because there was a thing about the horses in Central Park and all this stuff. So I wrote an article for the Times against it. And it came back to me like a million years ago. And she called it, English professor, Brooklyn College, she called it BBM, the Barbara Buckley method. And what, still remember, it comes back. And it came back and I was remembering, scribbling what kind of stupid words I wrote, but nowhere. So I said, well, it's just flashed into me. What she said was, this is useful, she said was, the Barbara Buckley method was, she had been a professor at college. So what you do is you just write down thoughts. Don't write it down. Just thoughts that you think are important, 5, 10, 15, randomly as you go through. This is important, this is important. You just write down 2 or 3 words, 5 words about each notion that you want to put down. Then once you've got maybe 15, 20, whatever you want to number, just thoughts, pieces of thoughts, phrases. And then what you do is you order them. You know, 1 over here, a 2 over here, and that will create an outline just by imagination.
It's so much easier with word processing, isn't it? You can just cut and paste all over the place.
And you can keep changing it.
And you can
ordering. I mean,
yeah. And there are different exercises. Here's an example of an exercise. It's called the Eulogy Exercise. You're attending a memorial service. Familiar people are filing in and sitting down. The eulogy is about to begin. You realize that the eulogy is about you. What would you like to hear said about yourself? Confronting your mortality can help you identify your core values and what you hold dear. It creates a personal call to action. So not only a bucket list about what you want to do, but what you want to hear said about you to affect change in your life. And then the question is, what is stopping you from becoming the person you want to be remembered as? It's an important thing. If you want to have all good things said, I think the perfect memorial service is where people are laughing as much as they're crying, and you've been reminded of things. And some people are real corkers, and it's okay to say those things about them because we're all human beings, and we have all kinds of things going on in our lives. But if there's something that you fear somebody will say about you, you might want to take a closer look at that and wonder if you might change that part of your character. Felix Adler, who founded Ethical Culture, said, "It is well at times in imagination to think of oneself as facing death, in order then to turn back and form a juster estimate of the aims and ends of life that really count." So just again, and of course there's a whole thing through art we see in memento mori. I mean, thinking about death and wondering how would we do things differently.
In Greek, you know thyself. It's the same notion. It's a way of re-examining your life.
And as Joseph, you said, you can just start with a blank page and write anything on it. Collect data, just make lists, whatever. I've always loved one thing that our founder said too. He said we should always acquire the habit of taking stock from time to time of our moral possessions, of keeping faithful count of our net gains and losses. Are we more charitable in our judgment of others, more ready to make allowances of their faults, to bear with their shortcomings? Are we more or are we less devoted to the public ends of humanity? Does our idealism turn out to have been a mere flash in the pan? Or does it grow wiser and warmer with the years? Does it burn with a steadier glow? So I think it's just a good practice anyway to say, how did I behave today? What did I do today? What could I have done better? And some people have, gratitude journals where they just, because they can't think of anything good, but they keep a journal. When I get up and the water's hot and I go, oh, a hot shower. I mean, it can be something, a simple gratitude practice is that, and knowing that many people don't have that. Any message, any memory is meaningful, no matter how trite it may sound to an adult. For one boy, that meant saving his mother's voice on an answering machine tape.
Yeah.
I have known people who will not delete that. They keep that answering tape on. They want to hear that voice. Donna Sherman is a director of a Center for Grieving Children and Families, and she said, children have an incredible desire to know who that person was. What the children are left with, what the family is left with, are memories. Western society is death-denying, a culture that values moving on rather than remembering. Sometimes people just don't know how to do that. So kind of developing that practice. My mother-in-law, my father-in-law died first, and my mother-in-law said that she felt that he was sitting at the end of the bed and talking with her. And her sons so kind of wrote, "Oh, Mom, it's been a year now. Can't you get over it?" Wow. Thank goodness she had daughters-in-law who listened. And so my sister-in-law Michelle and I said, "Well, tell us some more about that, Muriel." And then my sister-in-law Michelle said, "You know, that's really lovely." She said, "I'm only concerned that you might be waiting for him to come at night. So when he does come to speak with you, that's wonderful. But if you're waiting for him and not doing other things, that would be sad." So I think there's a way of, hearing people and saying, if you're, you know what I'm saying. There are unethical wills. Okay, what would be an unethical will? How not to write an ethical will. Some ethical wills, kind of gets back to what you said before. Some ethical wills have been written that reach out from the grave to instill guilt or blame, to denounce survivors, or attempt to control their lives. The danger signal is when you use statements like "you" or "you should." It works in an ethical will the same way it works in conversation. We always say to each other, "Are you using I statements?" So use I statements here too. Here's an example. "And now, my children, obey the instructions of your father. Know that you have been rebellious for as long as I have known you. You have not been obedient and have not appreciated the benefits I have given you. Your personal conduct and your business practices have caused me vexation and pain."
Nice.
It's succinct, it gets to the point. No, don't do
I
it.
actually had a client who did that in a legal will.
Ah.
Like it's fine. I usually have people say, "I intentionally leave nothing to anybody who's not mentioned," or "I intentionally leave nothing to so-and-so," just for the capacity part that nobody's going to say, "Oh, she forgot I existed."
Yeah.
But this person wanted to go on and on for 3 paragraphs in the will, why she was leaving these people out. And I kind of talked her out of it because they said, that A, it just makes you look very vindictive, and B, frankly, it may make them more likely than less likely to challenge because they have to disprove, or maybe prove, like if you say, "I'm disinheriting you because you're greedy," like what is that going to do to somebody that want to prove you right? So they're going to go.
It is sort of like libel, so if you can prove they're wrong. So, and so, we can get into a lot of into self-deception, to spinning, painting too attractive a picture. One thing to do is consult a trusted person. Yeah. Let that person, that friend, that pastor, that counselor, hold up the mirror to you, as you did. Hold up the mirror and say, is this really, what you want to say? Is this really, and ask those probing questions. Rabbi Jack Reimer says, "Words that come from the heart enter the heart." He says, "I don't want to dictate my values to my kids. I don't want to veto, but I want to vote. And if they're willing to take my property, they should at least be willing to consider my values." So there's another, it's like, I'm not going to tell you what to do, I'm not going to veto, I'm not going to tell you you're miserable, but at least listen. So finally, preserving, sharing, it has turned into a mini industry. If you Google ethical wills, you will just find so much information. It has turned into a mini industry with professional writers, videographers, therapists, counselors, of course. But the concept is energizing, and it really is injecting heart into the estate planning field. So those of you who are attorneys or in that field, It really is something that firms are looking at now. And, some people do hire someone to write. I'll tell you my story, and you put it in writing for me, or you videotape me. So they're being incorporated, as you asked before, they are being incorporated into legal wills and into financial planning practices. And part of it goes back to what you said, it's just sort of an explanation about a paragraph of why I'm doing this, but it could certainly be incorporated.
I think for financial planning practices, like particularly for people in trust, because it's the one thing, like I hate these things, like it being proposed as, that age-old question of which one, plan for your retirement or your child's education, like, that's not of course we're assuming that you have a roof over your head, but what we're talking about is, do you travel or do you pay for your child's education? It's not a financial value, that's a personal value. And nobody should be told what their personal value is. And maybe that's their way of their expressing it, if they said to somebody, paying for my child's education is the most important value in my life. Hopefully nobody tells them, oh, but you'll save taxes if you do something else, because they've just been told I could care less about saving taxes. Hopefully the financial planners are listening. Sometimes they don't. But
So if you are going to an attorney to talk about a legal will, you can say, and I would also like an ethical will included in this. Also, it's important to keep a printed or a handwritten hard copy, because we don't know where technology is going to take us and how it's going to change. And we still do write on paper. One of my colleagues who does another similar workshop, but about something you brought up, like a living will or a health proxy, says, keep those important papers in a metal box or plastic box, but put it in the freezer. Why? Because if there should be a fire in your apartment, in your house, guess what? The material around the freezer is going to preserve it. So if you don't have a safe deposit box, or keep it with somebody else, with your attorney, you can always still put it in the freezer.
Multiple copies.
Yeah, and it will. Yeah, it won't be destroyed even in a fire. So look to see again how you can, even with the multimedia presentations, how you can look to the preserving. So it can be attached to legal will. It can be read at the time of your death. It's becoming common to share them while the author is still alive. And it creates opportunities for an ongoing dialogue and allows also some additions and revisions. It could be that you read this out and something comes to light and you go, oh, I might want to change that now. Also, a community perspective. I keep them copies here for any members who'd like me to do so, and they can update it with me. And so when you have completed your ethical will, you will have gone through a process.
How long
really
it should
is
be?
life-changing.
How long it should be?
1,000 words.
It's entirely up to you. Robert, it's entirely up to you.
18 years ago, I put my parents in front of the camera, and I just asked them questions. And then I left the room, and I let them talk amongst themselves. And I had no idea that was a living will, but so I had this document.
That's what that
video.
is.
And they were, because I wanted to know things from them.
Mm-hmm.
So they told me, and I have it all on video. I did that 18 years ago. Now I suddenly realized.
Update it.
No, they don't have it. No, I have it.
Oh, but you have this. Isn't that wonderful that you have it? Yeah.
Did you tell them that you weren't going to look at it until after they were dead, or no?
But tell it
Obvious,
could be.
yeah.
I don't know if you were here when Ishmael Islam and I did the poetry platform. Remember, he had us writing haikus, couplet. It could be a haiku. It could be a couplet. It could be so short, but it could also be a whole scrapbook. It could be. There's no wrong way to do it. There really isn't.
One of the things that comes to mind as you've been talking is particularly for grandchildren and children is closure.
Yes.
That, particularly when it's a small child, they don't really feel. They don't understand, they don't feel, and most of us grew up at a time when children were not participants in the death and dying process, or we weren't allowed to go to the funerals or anything of that sort. So that our generations have all missed out on the experience of that transference. when I think about this one woman, and I think about my own experience, a way of giving a child closure. That, so you don't want a memorial service, maybe you should honor that, but you've given closure in other way.
And also, I'm glad you brought that up because there are different things that are age appropriate. And so as you hear this, these two daughters were 5 and 3, and now they're 15 and 13. And what was age appropriate at the different times for them, how they understand death. I remember a friend of my son's, his father died, and they, good Catholics, they told, well, he's in heaven now with the angels. Well, they caught him one day climbing up a tree. Well, I'm climbing the tree. I'm going to go find Daddy because he's up there in heaven. So recognize that children, there's different stages of development, what's age appropriate, and they're going to take some things very literally.
Actually, Maria Shriver said that